Welcome to Cura Property Buyers Agents on the Ground conversation. And we're back with Amanda Bennett from Elan Legal, because what we want to dedicate this podcast to today is the new first home buyer choice scheme that was introduced by the New South Wales state government, effective as at today, the 16th of January, 2023. So it's, as I said, it is a scheme launched by the New South Wales state government for first home buyers, and it specifically relates to a new choice between paying either the stamp duty that has always been in place or choosing an introductory land tax for buying property. So hi Amanda, welcome and thanks for joining us again.
Good morning, Ramon. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
I think we're allowed to keep saying that, right?
I think the statute of limitations on that is 31st of January. After that, it's officially no more.
Yeah. I always had the Australia Day weekend as the official kind of end to saying Happy New Year. So great. Yeah. And so let's get straight into it. So I'm going to really just ask you a few questions off the bat, being the expert and someone who should be and is required to know the details of this kind of policy back to front. So let's just start with a basic question. What is first home buyer choice?
Yeah, look, it's brand new. Stamp duty's been a thing for a very long time. So this is a really interesting and potentially great initiative for first home buyers. So it's called the First Home Buyer Choice Scheme. So effectively, it's, as you said, it's a choice between a smaller annual property tax and an upfront stamp duty. So that means that, unlike stamp duty, the property tax is calculated on the land value of the property you buy. Stamp duty is calculated on the purchase price. So A little bit of a difference there. And it means that if you're a first home buyer, you can opt in before settlement to pay this annual property tax, which is a much smaller property tax than the upfront stamp duty.
Oh, cool. So it's a choice. So let's just get this clear, because tax can be quite confusing. So stamp duty has always been around. It's calculated on the value of the land. So it's the land component only. So if you buy a house, the stamp duty is only calculated on the land, not the building, and same with the apartment. So whatever land component the apartment has allocated to it, that's how they calculate stamp duty. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. But land tax is calculated on the total purchase price of the property. So whatever you pay for land, building, whatever is written down on that contract as the amount you're paying to buy that property, that's how the government will calculate the land tax.
The stamp duty. Yeah, the stamp duty will be on your purchase price of the property.
Yes.
Land tax will be on the unimproved land value of the property, and so will the property tax. So the property tax, some people are kind of referring to it as a bit of a land tax, but it is different. It's a property tax. However, like land tax, it is calculated on what they call the unimproved land value. So just the land, no buildings.
Okay, so I had it the other way around. So, okay, let's just be clear. So if I buy a house, the land tax is calculated on the land component only, but the stamp duty is calculated on the total purchase price.
Yeah, exactly.
Got it. Well, as you can see, I'm acting like a first home buyer at the moment. So hopefully that's become really, really clear. Okay, cool. Well, So thanks for that. Now, as it says, it's for first home buyers only. But specifically, what does that mean? What is defined as a first home buyer in New South Wales?
So someone who hasn't bought any property before at all.
And does that mean anywhere in Australia or just New South Wales?
Yes, anywhere in Australia.
Okay.
Yeah. So that you're defined as a first home buyer if you've never bought property before. So interestingly, the property tax, so the first home buyer choice property tax, you can use that for your principal place of residence as a first home buyer, but you can also opt into that if you're looking at buying an investment property. So there's two different amounts that will be payable on that. And we can probably cover that a little bit further in the podcast. But So it applies to owner-occupied residential properties and it applies to residential investment properties. So with two different amounts payable. So if you're buying an investment property, you will pay slightly higher property tax. If you're buying to live in the property, you'll pay slightly lower property tax. But they're all both considerably lower than your upfront stamp duty.
Oh, that's really great. So buying my first property, it sounds like I've got quite a bit of flexibility as a first home buyer in that I don't necessarily have to buy the property and then live in it straight away. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. So if you buy it as your principal place of residence, at least one of the eligible purchasers needs to live in the property for at least 6 months within the first 12 months of owning it. So from settlement date.
Okay.
But if it's an investment property, don't need to live in it.
Okay, that's really great. So, and I think that in today's world, having that ability not to necessarily have to live in the property opens up my options as a buyer or as a first property buyer in New South Wales. So it's a real, I guess, kind of key difference between other types of first home buyer schemes that have been put in place, whether it was New South Wales or whether it was Australia, in that with this new scheme, if I choose land tax, it means I can buy the property as an investment or as a home.
Yeah, absolutely. So, previously, if you thought, look, I want to buy my first property, but I don't want to live where I can afford to buy, now you can decide to, potentially rent closer to the city and buy an investment property, say up on the Central Coast, and opt in for that property tax. So, yeah, it's really opened up a lot of choice for first home buyers. And, as a buyer's agent, as a conveyancer, we'll be the ones that will be at the forefront of answering all these questions. So,
yeah.
And there will be a lot of questions because it's brand new. So, first day, it's literally live today. So it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, it is exciting. That's like really, really cool. So knowing that, how do I actually go apply for this? Do I do it myself? Do I do it through you? Do I do it through someone else?
Definitely through your conveyancer or your solicitor. Either a property lawyer or conveyancer will do that for you. So when they're acting for you in your purchase, so there's a form that you can fill out. So there's a couple of forms. There's one that is a purchaser declaration that you'll have to fill out whether you pay stamp duty or the property tax. And then there's a first home buyer choice form that you'll need to fill out, which is a little bit like when you apply for a first home buyer's grant or the first home buyer's assistance scheme. So also something to remember is don't forget that there is the first home buyer's assistance scheme, which is different. And that's been in place for a little while now. So that means that a first home buyer, if they're purchasing a property up to $650,000, they pay no land tax at all. No property tax, no stamp duty. They don't pay any duty at all.
Yeah.
So if they buy a property between $650,000 and $800,000, there's a sliding scale. So you'll start paying a little bit of stamp duty, but you won't pay any land tax because it's your principal place of residence. So this new property tax or first home buyer scheme is really for people who are looking between the $650,000 and the $1.5 million. So if your property is over 1.5 million, unfortunately, you're not eligible. So you're only eligible if you're buying a property between 650,000 and 1.5 million.
Awesome. But still, that still gives me a good, I guess, quite a decent range of options as a first home buyer. And now in that, the previous or the current first home buyer assistance scheme, as you've just said, I can buy a property up to $850,000 and pay either zero stamp duty or less stamp duty, a bit more, but not as much as I would if I wasn't a first home buyer. And then this new first home buyer choice scheme, as I understand it, I think you said I can purchase a property up to $1.5 million and have either pay stamp duty or pay land tax. So really now, knowing in particular in the Sydney region or the major metropolitan regions, the 1.5 million really does open up me as a first home buyer to a range of different types of properties, either closer to the metropolitan areas where we know it typically is more expensive, but also regional areas that we know, particularly in the last 2 or 3 years, that have experienced significant increase in prices. So it's certainly, I think a complaint in the past has been, well, if I'm in Sydney, that first home buyer assistance scheme, it's not going to get me much. But now that I can potentially get a benefit up to 1.5 million, it really does open the options up for me if I'm in New South Wales or anywhere in New South Wales.
Yeah, particularly, like inner west, eastern suburbs, anywhere of those sort of like inner ring properties. If you're looking at living in it, it can be a little bit prohibitive if you're, you can't afford to get a car park. You can only afford 1 bedroom instead of 2. So yeah, like you said, this opens up a bit of flexibility for people. And yeah, there is a real interesting decision now that people can make. And we have discussed off camera around how it is actually really wise to speak to your mortgage broker as well about your eligibility for the property tax and whether that's a really smart decision for you, depending on your borrowing capacity. In some circumstances, it can affect your borrowing capacity going forward because your annual property tax, annual, it is going to be something that you pay every year. It's going to be calculated on a financial year, like land tax. Unlike land tax, which is calendar year. And the land value of your property is going to be determined by the Valuer General. So you can actually go onto the New South Wales Valuer General website. You can look at what a land value would be on a potential purchase for you, whether it's an apartment or a house. So you can find out what that land value will be. Then you can go onto the New South Wales Revenue website and you can look at their calculator and you'll be able to work out what that potential property tax would be versus stamp duty. And I've actually done a couple of examples if now's a good time.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, that'd be really great.
So I've recently had a client who bought a property, an apartment in the city for 1 million, right? So if he was looking at paying stamp duty, he'd be paying $40,090 upfront stamp duty. Yeah. So if he chose to opt into the property tax, he would be looking at over 5 years, because you do need to put in the calculators how long you're intending to hold it. And we're sort of estimating that, first home buyers might hold a property for, say, 5 years, between 5 and 10, but I've calculated it on 5. So he would be paying an estimated property tax annually of just over $4,000. So that's a big difference, up front.
Well, yeah, it's a huge difference. And also, not only is there a huge difference in terms of the total cost, there's also there'll be a lot of home buyers in a situation where they may not have the kind of deposit or their deposit. They may want to divert the deposit into buying something, a different type of property or a larger property. And they do have the income capacity to pay that annual land tax. And in this case, you talked about $4,000 per annum. It may well be that, a lot of people in a situation where we've got good earnings and good income, but we just don't have that deposit that will land us the kind of place we want. Whereas this scheme will give you that choice to, potentially go up a little bit or buy something just that little bit better if you can afford to pay that annual land tax fee.
Yeah, absolutely. And you do have to remember that you're going to be paying council rates and water rates. Yep. If you're buying an apartment, you're going to have strata levy. So those are all the ongoing costs, annual costs for you. So as we said, stamp duty is upfront, one cost, and that's it. But it is quite a substantial amount more. So whether you can afford the ongoing property tax might be a really good option for you.
And I think that, just going back to your previous point, Amanda, I think that's a really good argument for anyone who's looking at potentially being eligible for this scheme, doing your homework up front and definitely talking with you as your conveyancer, but also, as you said before, having that conversation with your lender or mortgage broker, because they're going to be able to have to make these calculations when they submit your loan application to the bank. So, adding that extra cost per year may well, or is likely to affect the bank's calculation when they determine your capacity to borrow to buy a property.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, definitely a consideration. And when you're looking at strata properties, most people would assume quite correctly that the land value is quite small. So, and the land value is generally the same as your unit entitlement for the strata property. So if you're looking at buying a strata property, yes, your property tax is pretty small. And I have actually done another example for a client of mine who bought up the coast in Oyster Bay. And that was a $1.5 million property. And that stamp duty was $66,700.
Wow.
And over 5 years, the annual property tax would be an estimated $12,000.
That's a huge difference.
Well,
wow.
There is a big difference, yeah. So if that was going to be your first investment property and it was $1.5 million house in Oyster Bay, that's what you would be looking at. And generally, you'd need to check this with your accountant or financial advisor, but that would be something that would generally be claimable. So if it's an investment property, you'd be looking at all of those costs that come with your investment as being something that's potentially claimable, but definitely check with your accountant because we don't give financial advice. Yes,
of course. But, based on the calculations that you've given us in the examples that you've used with real people, it appears as though this change could be a real game changer for people buying their first property. And the other thing to remember, because it only applies to first home buyers, that it gives you that little bit more competitiveness, I guess, in the market. Whereas in the past, typically when a scheme is introduced or some kind of concession, what would typically happen in the past is the value of the property would just go up by the amount of that concession or that benefit. So if, for example, there was a scheme where you got $10,000, it was a first home $10,000 in a first home buyer scheme, automatically what would happen would be the market would just, for that type of price range, would go up by the 10,000. With this scheme, because it's so restricted to first home buyers only, it's going to give you that ability just to bid that little bit higher, because you've got the option to save some of that money instead of paying stamp duty, to use it to your deposit, because potentially if you can afford to maintain those annual land tax payments.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, this is all really great. And Amanda, I think that it sounds as though, hopefully, from what we've talked about so far, we've been able to, I guess, shed some light into some of the detail around this new scheme. But as always, there's going to be a lot more detail. So if I'm looking or interested and potentially eligible for this, where would I find more information?
Well, firstly, New South Wales Revenue website. That's a great source of information. It's explained quite well on the website. It's got property tax calculators you can use. As I mentioned, if you want to look at the land value of a property that you're potentially interested in, the Valuer General website, New South Wales Valuer General website. I'm always happy to run through scenarios as well with clients. So, call me, call your conveyancer, call your property lawyer. They should be able to run through different scenarios with you because the property tax calculator is an easy calculator. But I do know that when people are looking at buying property, you've got a lot going on. So probably the last thing you want to do is additional research on all of this sort of stuff. So talk to your conveyancer. They're a great source of information. And, you can just tell them the property you're interested in. They can do quick looks on those two websites, calculate it for you and let you know what you'd be up for.
Sure. And if you decide to go ahead with using a buyer's agent, hopefully your buyer's agent will have, of course, learned, educated themselves on this policy as well, to provide that advice and assist with any questions that you might have at the same time.
Yeah, as you and I know, when we work together, it's great to have that team in place. So your property buyer's agent, your conveyancer, your mortgage broker, they're your team, and they're the ones that you need to talk to about all of your decisions around property, as well as that accountant.
Absolutely. Okay. Amanda, I think we've covered most of what we need to cover in a general sense and in a basic sense for this scheme. Is there anything else that you feel that is worth bringing up or talking about the first home buyer choice scheme?
Well, look, one thing to mention is the people who feel like they've missed out. You know, they bought a property just before January the 16th, and they think, damn, I missed out on that. But actually, you didn't. So if you bought a property after the November the 11th, 2022, so you can now retrospectively choose to opt in to this property tax. So the first home buyer choice scheme, you can opt into that. I would say talk to your conveyancer about it because there is a way you can apply for it yourself on the New South Wales Revenue website, but you need a lot of evidence, and your conveyancer should have all of that for you. So with my clients, I'm doing that. Anyone who's decided that they wanted to opt in and they bought after the 11th of November 2022, you can do that. So you can get that refund of stamp duty, which would be a nice little bonus for people. There's also, I've had questions around, can I buy with someone who isn't eligible? So someone who's bought property before. And the assumption is that you can't, but you actually can in some circumstances. So if your share of the property is over 50%, you can actually opt in to the property tax, so the first home buyer choice scheme. You can opt in, but the person who you're buying with who has bought property before would be classified as not eligible, and they pay stamp duty on their share. So, if you needed to buy with a family member or a friend, you could do that. You can't buy with what they call your spouse. So you would need to look at your particular scenario to see whether that's a possibility for you. But it does mean that expands that pool just that little bit for people who may, want to buy with someone who has bought before. So you may be eligible.
Couple of really great tips there. So just going back on those, so if you have bought a property since the 11th of November 2022, so last year, and you would like to look at potentially claiming this, definitely call your conveyancer or contact your conveyancer and ask the question. Never hurts to ask. And secondly, just because you're buying with someone who's bought property before doesn't necessarily mean you can't get some of this benefit. And again, that's something that you would want to talk with your conveyancer as part of the buying process.
Absolutely, yep.
Okay, well, look, Amanda, I think we've covered everything that we needed to with this new scheme. It sounds like as I said before, a real game changer for people buying their first property in New South Wales. It's already started. So as at today, the 16th of January, the first home buyer choice scheme is in place. If you'd like to know more, definitely contact your conveyancer. There is also more information on the New South Wales Government Revenue New South Wales website, the Valuer General's website on land values, and of course talk to your mortgage broker for any impacts on your loan application. And of course, if you are going to consider choosing the actual land tax scheme itself, that will impact your income, and of course talk to any financial advisor or accountant around that. Amanda, once again, thank you so much. It's been really insightful. Hopefully this helps you, the first home buyers out there, understand the scheme a bit better, get out there, check it out, and hopefully that puts you in the game to buy the property that you want.
My pleasure.
Okay, thanks, Amanda, and thanks, everyone. We'll see you again on Cura Property on the Ground podcast. We'll talk again soon.